Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new and exciting episode of Cyber Prophets. Cyber Prophets, the podcast where we are prophesizing the future of technology. I am here once again with my co host and brother from another mother, Federico.
Welcome, everyone. Hopefully, this time you're going to learn new topics that are going to enrich your knowledge and you will be able to empower yourself to new levels.
Last week, we talked about cloud native. What was that? If you haven't watched the video, the link is on the description. But now, we're going to talk about the counterpart, and that is cloud agnostic. What is cloud agnostic? We're going to go through, first of all, the concept. What does it mean? We're going to give you some examples and we're going to evaluate what are the advantages and disadvantages of using this approach. Let's go for it. First of all, what is cloud agnostic? According to an official definition, cloud agnostic refers to tools, platforms, or applications that are compatible with any cloud infrastructure. That might be a very key phrase, compatible with any cloud infrastructure. And this can be moved to and from different cloud environments without any operational issues. Now, how does this concept sound to you, Federico? What can you say about it?
Well, generally speaking, cloud agnostic is any application that you know that are well used in the market that you can transfer between Azure, Google Cloud, AWS, or if you have other clouds that are smaller, you will be able to move your entire projects without doing any special adjustments.
Mhm. Do you have any experience creating cloud agnostic applications?
Yeah, yeah.
And what kind of tools can be used for this purpose?
Well, one of them was SQL Server because some of our solutions were in Azure and then we moved into AWS. And during the transition, we moved the entire back. We created a BAK file that is a backup and we transferred it from Azure to AWS without doing any adjustments. It was just normal SQL. We imported the database and it was there. In less than 2 hours, the full move was done.
Okay, yeah, and the cloud native alternative would have been to use Azure SQL, right?
Yeah, SQL Azure will have been the option.
SQL
Uh,
Azure.
Very likely you will have had a lot of issues because SQL Azure and SQL Server are not the same application. They are similar. I'm still wondering why Microsoft didn't create a proper SQL Azure compatibility. And there many things are not available. And the other way around, there are some things that will be available in SQL Azure that are not available in SQL Server. And you might need to do a lot of adjustments if you need to do any transfer.
Yeah. Okay, so this is something related to the databases. And what about the Lambda functions that we were talking about last time?
Yeah, that's also tricky because in the Azure functions are not exactly the same as the Lambda functions. The Lambda functions have their own libraries and you need to do every adjustment. For example, there is the EFS, that is a shared drive that exists in AWS, but it doesn't exist in Azure. So when you
Yeah.
do these transfers, you need to reconfigure it in the opposite. You might need to see if every single library or solution exists. In the majority of cases, there might be some equivalence, but not necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
When we were doing the migration of the Azure functions, was not pleasant at all because many things were not the same. And in some cases, the easy solution was just to rewrite them from scratch, trying to meet the same.
Oh,
Yeah,
you you went to that level of
yeah,
having to rewrite everything from scratch.
yeah. Well, I will say that some part of the logic, like the generic functions, stay the same, reading the CSVs, but not the part of connecting with the infrastructure. And that wasn't nice. But
Mm-hmm.
it was a risk. Well, not a risk, it was a requirement because we had to move from Azure to AWS, and the option is, well, you just have to do it. There is no plan B.
And under which circumstances can this happen that you will have to move from one cloud to another?
Agreements between companies or disagreements, or that you get a better offer.
Okay.
And that's what
So it's all about the money, we could
yeah.
say, the
Yeah,
budget.
I had a similar experience that it was all about the budget, that the client, well, there was an agreement between the company and the provider. AWS provided a better offer, and then it was like, well, you must move everything, and that's all.
And you just got orders from management that
Yeah,
you need to migrate everything from one
yeah,
cloud to the other.
yeah.
Did
And
they actually okay, so this is something interesting because they might reduce the cost of what they are paying for the use of the cloud. However, if they at some point develop cloud native applications that would require a huge change, right? Writing everything from scratch, it may go as far as that. So when this happens, do they consider, like, does management, in the case that you mentioned, does management consider that they might have also some native cloud native applications running somewhere?
no, in that case, it was a very big problem because they didn't measure the differences between AWS and Azure. And there were huge changes. There were many problems. There were other issues with Active Directory and so many troubles in the middle
Mm-hmm.
that the management, I think that the first thing they should have asked us if that was a good idea before taking the decision.
Mm-hmm.
But many times I have seen that companies just go because it sounds cheaper, but in fact it's not.
Yeah,
That
because it's a big process of changing everything, right?
yeah, and like another example of something that I didn't face, but it could have been a bigger issue, is that in one case we use Elastic Container Service instead of Kubernetes. That is technically the private source solution of AWS. But if we
Okay.
have needed to go in reverse, it would have been a massive mess. Because first of all, we need to understand how different is the container service provided by Microsoft. I know that they have their own private source solution, but I'm not sure if
Okay.
they look exactly the same. I'm not sure if they offer the same solutions. You need to understand, okay, is it the task? Okay, because the task definition will be a pod in the let's say Kubernetes terms. The service is still a service, but you need to understand how similar they are. Is the concepts are the same? How much it's gonna impact? What is gonna be the difference of the clusters? Do you have the same solutions? And there are too many considerations. And in my experience, everything is about money, and they don't really visualize. And migrating solutions is also an expense because it's not that I just move it. It's like there were incompatibility issues with EFS, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge problem for us. And then it's like, yeah, but then you need to open ports because ports are not necessarily the same. And there are
Okay.
so many drawbacks when you're doing a migration that in some cases it might not even work. I have a friend who had another case that they moved everything from AWS to Azure. That was the other opposite side. Uh,
Okay.
the management didn't do the proper research also. And in their cases, they are managing a very intense amount of data in the sense because they are working with maps, but it's
Mm-hmm.
extremely intense.
Okay.
The solution didn't exist in Azure. There was no equivalent for the amount of
Okay.
data they were handling. They had to roll back everything to AWS after like 3 or 4 months of work.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because
After
Azure,
3 or 4 months, they rolled back everything.
yeah, because there was not a proper research and Azure didn't support the same equivalent of what they were working on. Why? Because, well, I don't know exactly the details behind, but there was something related to the Linux configurations that they had, the amount of power that they require, and other details. But in the end, it's like there was no way to do it. There was like no way, and they
That
had to put
basically means a lot of money
a
wasted.
lot of money. A lot of money was wasted.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And since we're talking about like cloud native and cloud agnostic now, can apps be 100% cloud agnostic?
There is a possibility, but in my opinion, you might also involve in certain additional cost, because cloud agnostic has the benefit that from one side you are free to do whatever you want. But keep in mind, not everything will be cloud agnostic. Like a virtual private network will not be cloud agnostic. This will be cloud specific. Everything related to the networks inside will not be exactly cloud agnostic, because this is how every company handles them. The security groups, or like the information and how do you protect the security, might not be exactly the same. But these are like, they are major things, of course, but I wouldn't say that this is when you're working with cloud agnostic, this is not what comes to your mind. It will be the databases, the applications, and of course you can do everything without lambdas because, or the Azure functions, because what this is in the end is a small container. But if you want to emulate even how this works, and you would like to do everything with Kubernetes, you must be really clever with all the networks, the cost, the efficiency, which if you don't have all the things perfectly aligned and you know exactly the cost, it's gonna be more expensive.
So what you're saying is that even if I try to develop my application to be 100% cloud agnostic, that will mean that most likely the database and the applications will be cloud agnostic, but there will be still some configuration needed on the cloud side. That will be, let's say, the cloud native part. And this is mostly related to infrastructure,
Yeah.
such as network.
But in those areas, Terraform can support you.
Terraform.
Yeah, Terraform or other solutions like from infrastructure as a code. There are some solutions that you can even write them in C#, Java, and other solutions. So yeah, I would say that area, that's why I don't see it, even though it's cloud native, it can be handled by other solutions, because it's more like neutral things. But when you have like using the lambdas or certain functions or certain databases or certain cache app databases, might not be possible in and you might need to do certain workarounds, reconfigure everything.
Can you give us like a short introduction or a short description of what this Terraform is?
Terraform is infrastructure as a code. It helps you to create like the configuration of the solution. You will create like, I would like a database that has this configuration. I would like this network that is from the IP 100 or 185. And you can give all the configurations of the basic infrastructure in the cloud that you want to deploy.
So is it like scripts?
Yeah, it's like a kind of script. Technically, it's a kind of a script, and then you can deploy the script in every solution. They might not be like 100% compatible with every solution, but the thing is that at least the infrastructure part or the security part most likely can be replicated. But the more you go in depth is where you're gonna have more and more challenges.
So is this Terraform an industry standard? Is it like actually supported by the three biggest cloud providers?
Indeed.
Is it?
Terraform is the standard for this.
Okay. Okay.
Terraform is like, if you want to work with infrastructure as a code, Terraform is the number one solution.
Then that would be a really good alternative to creating a cloud agnostic application, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now I would like to talk with you, Federico, about the advantages and disadvantages of having a cloud agnostic application. So first of all, it is obvious that one of the advantages is that you avoid the cloud lock, since you can migrate from one cloud provider to the other with, let's not call it with no hassle, but with minimum hassle. Probably if your application is ready for it, there will be still some minor changes, but it won't be something so huge as to keep you locked to a cloud provider. That's one of the big advantages. Now, what are the disadvantages then?
The first one is about cost, because even though it sounds cheaper, but if you want to go fully cloud agnostic, you need to be extremely clever with all the infrastructure. The easiest
Okay.
example, you have Kubernetes that as soon as you create the cluster, it's going to start charging you money.
Uh-huh.
Minus one, already you're paying. But if you're using a cloud native solution, you don't pay until you start the service.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is going to charge you the full amount of the cluster. If you
Oh,
have
wow.
no apps running, it's going to charge you. If you have no pods running, no services running, it's going to charge you money. And the only way to save money is that you need to reserve for a year cluster or something like that, which is going to be expensive also because you need to pay in advance a huge amount of money. And what if you don't use it?
Oh,
So
wow. Yeah.
what if you need to resize the cluster because it requires more? What if it requires less resources, fewer resources? So you need to be very, very clever with those decisions. Yeah, from one side, it sounds great because I can move all my containers from AWS to Azure. But if I need to be clever with the size of the cluster, it's not necessarily so cheap.
Yeah, you have to be very cautious about what you're doing, right? And
Yeah.
like tweak a bit here, tweak a bit over there about all of the small items. Well, they might look small in the configuration, but at the end of the day, you could receive like a big bill just because you forgot to tweak something in the configuration, right?
Yeah. And you need to also wonder like how great your, let's say, your architect has to be, or the people who is supporting those servers. It's a lot of money behind. You need to have very clever people. And if you
Oh,
don't have
yeah.
these people who are really trained, most likely you will experience that the cluster was too small, the cluster was too big, you're wasting a lot of money, and
Mm-hmm.
it can increase your cost. It's like if you, instead of running the database in a server, in a service provided by a company, you're going to decide to run it in a virtual machine. Yeah, of course, you will have a lot of benefits of that solution. But on the other hand, you need to install the patches. What happens if a patch goes wrong?
Can be
And
a
the
problem.
database goes off. The cloud company is not going to support you. You have to figure it out on your own. But in the cloud native approach, if the database is gone, the company must figure it out how to fix your problem
Mm-hmm.
because they are the ones who are supporting the server. They are the ones who are taking care of the patches. They are the ones who are doing all these small things.
Okay, yeah, that's something that every company has to bear in mind when they are developing cloud agnostic applications. It is necessary to have experts who know what they are doing, especially in terms of saving, yeah, for the company, cost saving for the company.
At least in my case, I don't like too much the approach of cloud agnostic. It sounds great in paper, but in the real life is that you are not so often changing among companies. We might speak a little bit after when we are speaking when you're using a multi-cloud approach, but also a multi-cloud approach is not something that you do on weekly basis.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that in those scenarios, you might consider like try to build some cloud agnostic, but you need to also understand when you're going to do a multi-cloud approach. This is not for every case. I will say that the majority of cases, you will go to the cloud native because it's cheaper. You need
Yeah.
to consider that in the
Oh.
cloud agnostic, someone has to support those servers. Someone has to take care of the cloud. So how much is gonna cost you that person? Let's say the best case scenario, $12,000 per year. The best case scenario, and you need. But if you need to someone that is really clever taking care of all those things, might cost you the double, the triple, and this is an extra cost. Management can easily say, yeah, we're gonna go to this approach, and then who is gonna take care of that?
Mm-hmm.
$12,000. You need to hire someone.
Okay. Yeah,
And
you will need to hire some.
that's a very optimistic scenario. I don't think that you will get it for such a small amount of money.
Yeah, $12,000 a year, you mean, or?
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think you will get them. I think the best case scenario will be 60,000 or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds more realistic. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
sounds more realistic. because like 12,000 will actually mean like 1,000 per month. So
Yeah, that's why I was saying the
you
best
want to get that.
you will get like someone who will hire a very fresh person leaving just the university. But that's a very bad case because in theory you need to support these devices, and if you try to automate it, yeah, the patch can go wrong. I faced those experiences in the past. That's why I moved to cloud native, because I faced too many troubles with the cloud agnostic approach. Too many troubles in the past.
Mhm.
The patches are the worst enemy. I remember that we had a patch that I have no clue what the patch did, but it increased the requirements of our Java virtual machine in 80%.
80%.
We had to double the size of the VM.
Wow.
It was
Okay.
crazy because we had to double it, and we couldn't roll it back. We tried to roll back the patch. It didn't work. It completely screwed the Java virtual machine.
Oh no.
And for several months, the client had to pay. There was no option.
Really?
It was really bad. And that's one of the reasons why I stopped using the cloud agnostic approach, and I became like quite reluctant and moved only to cloud native, because in cloud native, well, we have that we're locked in a way, but I don't think that we're going to move to Google Cloud the next week. We have been
Okay.
working
Yeah.
with with AWS for the last 2 years, and everything is going great. And I don't think we're rolling back to Google Cloud the next week, or to Azure, or to other solution.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, this decision at the end of the day comes from management, right?
Yeah.
So it's something to bear in mind. And I will just now like to summarize what we went through today. First of all, cloud agnostic is the approach of developing applications that can be deployed in any cloud environment, uh, call it AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and also they have the capability or the flexibility of being, you can easily migrate them from one cloud provider to the other. However, it has the disadvantage that you have to be an expert in order to tweak everything and to avoid unnecessary costs on your cloud provider, because like you are basically deploying everything yourself and not following any like recommended or like any native things from the cloud. So you have to be careful about that, and that could probably incur in several costs related to the experts that you will need to hire in order to have all of this knowledge available for you. And on that note, I would like to close the episode for today. And don't forget, next week we're going to talk about the alternative to both of these, cloud native, cloud agnostic, and the alternative is, Federico?
Multi-cloud.
Multi-cloud approach. Yes, that's going to be the topic for our next week. So tune in. Don't forget to subscribe. Share the link with everyone you know. And see you then again until next week.